For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam. I'm the Conservation Director with Atlanta Audubon. Yeah, thanks for coming to our second digital or virtual Birds and Beers. The last one was a lot of fun, so we decided to keep doing them until you all stopped coming. As I get started here, I wanted to, besides thank you all and encourage you all to get out and see birds, I want you to start, if you can, in the chat box. There's a chat box on the bottom, so if you have any questions or comments during this, just plug them down there. We'll be monitoring as best as we can and try to mix in your questions as they come. Go ahead and share what you're drinking. So my first beer, I have a Pretoria Brown Thrasher. So my first are beer themed. All my beers are Georgia breweries. So this is from Albany, which is, they're getting hit, or Albany. They're getting hit pretty hard right now. So that's my beer in solidarity to the people of Southwest Georgia.
Nice.
That's a nice brown ale. But yeah, go ahead and share what you're drinking in the chat box. If you have any cool backyard birds, or if you've been hitting your local patch at a safe distance, go ahead and share that. I had, not that exciting, but I had a house wren at my apartment complex, which was new for the complex for the year. So, small victories these days. I wanted to mention a few other virtual events that we have coming up. We have our book club, which is Sunday, I believe. It's not too late to sign up for that. Pretty much you're just discuss a book about owls that you've read. You can sit in, participate. If you've had interest in our book club, I encourage you to check that out. And also we have our monthly meeting we're doing virtual with Malcolm Hodges, the Feathers and Flames, and the connection between wildfire and prescribed burn and the birds of the Southeast, specifically here in Georgia. So that's Sunday afternoon, I believe at 3:30. You can check our website and our digital resources page to learn more. We also have a new event which we just scheduled for May 5th at lunchtime. It's an Ask Chippy live Q&A. So myself and some of the other staff are going to be taking user questions, whatever's on your mind bird related. So feel free to come put us on the spot. Another cool thing I wanted to mention before we get started is the Birdcast website from Cornell. If you haven't checked it out, Birdcast, they do a forecast of bird movement for a 3-day window. And tonight in Georgia looks pretty good. So if you can get out and bird your yard tomorrow morning, there's a lot of movement tonight, a lot of birds flying overhead. So there could be some cool stuff arriving, or just more birds arriving. And then one thing for those of you who are here, last week I decided, or 2 weeks ago, I decided to dabble and throw in some trivia. So I have some questions. So this is the first question. You can put your answer in the chat box if you'd like. If you don't want to be spoiled, you can keep it to yourself and try not to peek, and I'll run down the answers at the end. But the first question that I threw up, they're all kind of migration related, and a lot of them connect to our guest speakers today. But what migratory bird just returning to Georgia has either a pinkish red or a yellowish wing pit, an underwing pit? So again, a migratory bird just coming back to Georgia. I think I made the questions a little bit harder this week, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so again, I'm Adam, and I reached out to 5 of my friends, and they surprisingly all said yes and are here, which was great. So tonight I'm going to be speaking with Giff Beaton. If you're a birder in Georgia, you know Giff. He's an author, birding guru, big day record holder, and a pilot, little jack of all trades, photographer. So talking with Giff, my good friend Paul Smith, who is the founder of Fauna Paraguay and a bird guide down in South America. Jennie Carr, who was in my graduate department a few years back. She's an assistant professor at Washington College in Maryland. Eric Antonio Martinez, he is the guide and owner of Mexican Birding Tours. And then Bryan Lenz is going to be our last speaker, and he's the Bird Collisions campaign manager at the American Bird Conservancy. So yeah, again, keep the chat going, questions, fun insights, whatever you're drinking. We're excited that you're here. And we're going to go ahead and kick things off with Giff. So Giff, if you can, hopefully you can hear me.
I can totally hear you.
And what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a Scofflaw Double Jeopardy Double IPA to start.
Nice. Not to throw out the dirty language right here at the beginning, but Scofflaw is known for their, F blank series. They have F pollen, they have F cancer, they have Corona. That I think it's a brewery only if you do a drive up for their beers. I think it's a grapefruit IPA or something. So that's awesome. They do tons of great stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and I thought I had one of my other Giff books here, but I only have 2.
Okay.
Was one of the editors of the Breeding Bird Atlas of Georgia. And he also wrote this great book, if you guys haven't checked it out, Birding Georgia.
Wow, that's a blast from the past.
I have your Kennesaw book somewhere. I think I left it at the office, so I couldn't pull it out. But I guess I'll start with spring migration. Maybe the most notable, one of the most notable spots here in Metro Atlanta is Kennesaw, and you've kind of become the guy at Kennesaw. You've spent so much time there. Can you talk a little bit about it, or what makes Kennesaw such a special migratory hotspot? And from all your time birding there, is there a specific morning that sticks out as noteworthy, whether it be a rare bird or just diversity of warblers?
Oh, wow. I mean, I could spend the whole hour just answering that one question. But when I first moved to Atlanta in 1991, it was kind of known as a okay spot. And a guy that used to bird here a lot, Bruce Drawley, phenomenal birder, great guy. And I just started going up there and I remember the first day in the fall of 91, we had like 20 hooded warblers. And we were like, that's really bizarre. So we said in the spring of 92, let's go a little bit more. And we started getting all these ceruleans and all these warbler days of 16, 18, 20. And pretty soon the word started getting out that there were a lot of birds there. It is increasingly a green oasis, almost 3,000 acres in the greater Atlanta metro area, which for a metro area is fairly forested compared to, you fly over the big cities in the northeastern Europe and it's all concrete. We have a lot of green, but Kennesaw is just this clump of green. And as you come south in the fall, if you're a bird, if you're flying down the ridges of the Appalachians, that's like the last mountain you see when you come out of the Blue Ridge. And you can sort of see Pine Mountain a little bit, which is why people like Walt Chambers get so many great birds there. But Kennesaw is big. I mean, it's 1,000 feet above the surrounding terrain, heavily wooded, and just seems to attract a lot of birds. All these nocturnal migrant passerines, I think when they start coming down in early morning, they see all the lights of Atlanta and the areas around Atlanta, and this just big black patch of Kennesaw, which is all forest. So I think they just kind of dive in there.
And do you have a special day or anything that sticks out, or your top?
Honestly, I have been up Kennesaw. I have counted lately over 1,200 times, and in that time there are so many. One fall, it was like August 13th or 14th, around 1993. Bruce Drawley and I had 33 cerulean warblers. Then in the spring of 94, when we first started realizing that there were coots that were landing on Kennesaw Mountain in migration, we had 2 one morning, and we were just blown away. And then of course, a lot of the rarities, the McGillivrays warblers, the mourning warblers. We've had Bachman sparrow there, purple gallinule, short-eared owl. I mean, the list is insane. If I had to pick one, it would either be the mourning. We had 24 warbler species, or the fall day that Bruce and I had 33 ceruleans. There's just so many, it's really hard to pick it out. It's an insane place.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably responsible for me to mention that Kennesaw is closed currently.
Kennesaw is closed. I just saw somebody send in a question. I have heard through the grapevine that the feds are thinking about opening up some of those parks pretty soon. So hopefully.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that. And as Giff mentioned, August, which isn't always, things are just starting to heat up. It's a great time to go look for ceruleans, which I know are a tough bird for many people. So fall migration is good. It might not have the cachet of spring, but it's got great birds out there.
Yeah, so if you want to see a cerulean, the window in spring is pretty small. The big window is the 20th to the 30th of April. So that's right now. So if you can't go to Kennesaw, any riparian forested corridor, it's got to have tall trees. Ceruleans will occasionally feed in scrub or in saplings, but they love the canopy like Blackburnians. So find a place along either the Chattahoochee River or another river that has tall trees and just listen for the song. It's like a fast black-throated blue. You'll probably see more black-throated blues in here, but listen for the males singing in the trees, and they're usually very persistent singers in spring. So that would be my best advice in spring.
So this is a bit of an unfair question. It's, almost as unfair as like, what's your favorite bird? But do you have a favorite spring migrant, or do you have a favorite warbler? Either or?
Well, if you've been listening for the last 5 minutes, you could probably guess cerulean. That's really high up there. I mean, I love all the warblers. Probably. Do you have one of the Kennesaw T-shirts? These are my 4 favorites: Blackburnian, cerulean, worm-eating, and golden wing. Those are the top 4 for me.
I don't, but is that the same image that's on the cover of the checklist?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
We commissioned that with Keith Hansen out in California. I badgered him for like 10 years to get him to do that because he didn't want to do an Eastern thing. And I actually have the original painting in my house too. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, this time last year, as Facebook so painfully reminded me, I was setting off on a Georgia Big Day attempt. And of course, I was chasing your record, which fell short, me and my teammates. But from the stories we've heard from you and Jim and Nathan and others, you guys were machines back in the day. And I just didn't know if you had any fun Big Day highlights or crazy stories from all those times you guys would chase birds across the state.
Again, the core team was Jim Flynn, Malcolm Hodges, and Bud Horn. And they were all phenomenal birders, great ears, great skills. And we did somewhere around 45 Georgia Big Days, lots of April Big Days, of course, because that's when you could get the biggest number. But we did them, every month. And, of course, we had our share of mishaps. The record is not really what I consider our best big day. When we first created that route, that started in Augusta, then went up to Pine Log, then blitzed through Atlanta, including Kennesaw. We had a day, I think it was in 2000, we came past Dublin with, a crushing record, like 140 something. I would have guaranteed that was going to go over 200, which is what we were always chasing. We got to Dublin, and there was an unforecast wall of rain. And that stayed the whole way down I-16, the whole way down I-95. We only added like 20 more birds. We ended up with 168. That would have been the 200 day. And it just didn't happen.
For those of you who don't know a big day, you pretty much are birding for 24 hours straight to see the most you can in a predetermined geographic area, this time the state. And if you know Georgia and you're paying attention to Giff, you'll realize how crazy they were, because it's already painful enough to go from Atlanta to Bartow County down to the coast.
Right.
And they mixed in that trip to Augusta at midnight. So
we would be at Augusta as the clock struck. Back when Finney Swamp was so awesome, we had keys to get in there, and we would go in there and we would knock off a lot of the rails and sometimes bittern and some of that stuff. And then that's back when there was a Ross's goose that lived in Isla near Madison, and we would get there like at 2:30. Then we would, we could go up Kennesaw. We would do nocturnal thrush counts from like 3 to 3:30 a.m. But we had keys there. This was all legal. We had permission to go to all these places. We would run back down the mountain and then, drive up to Pine Log to be there at dawn. It was always around 700 miles. Really, in today, with all we know about carbon, it would be hard for me to do all those big days again, because we did so much. We spent so much gas and, energy, but they sure were fun.
And someone just asked if you could mention again your best total, 193.
So the record's 193.
All right, transitioning a little bit back to your book, not to plug it hard here, but
don't plug it because it's not available. I have like 2 or 3 copies around here somewhere, but as far as I know, used copies are ridiculous, and a lot of it's out of date. But anyway, go ahead. In
here, you described over 100 different birding locations, and I have a 3-part question. A, I know I keep drilling on your favorite stuff, but A, do you have a favorite birding spot in Georgia? B, is there anywhere in here that you would now take out? Has it maybe fallen apart for access, or?
Oh, absolutely.
The privet patch, and then also, are there any that aren't in there that you would now add?
Yeah, so this is kind of a sad story. My favorite spot in Georgia is obviously Kennesaw Mountain. That's a no-brainer. I actually wrote a second edition of that in 2008, for Falcon Press. And after hammering me for 2 years to turn it in, they got bought out by Globe Pequot, and Globe said, we're cutting the series. So I said, fine, give me the rights to the book and I'll just publish it, because I just worked on it for years. And they said, no, you can't have the rights. So in that edition, I took out several, like Andrews Island was going to be in the original, and they wouldn't let us put it in. I would totally put that in there. Onslow Island I would keep in there, even though it has many different rules. And then I added a number of things, like I added Charlie Elliott, and I added Pine Mountain, and I added River Road in Columbus. And there's a lot of, I mean, we don't know all the great spots. What we need are local birders. I'm looking at all you watching this. Find your local patch, especially a place along a river. You can't go wrong. Trails along a river in decent riparian forest. Places along the coast that are traps at the north end or the south end of an island, or, you know, a wastewater treatment plant that nobody knows about, or, you know, a place, a sewage dump for all that. You know, just find your local spots. When I fly over Columbus, I always look at that landfill that's right at the corner of 575 and 85 and 185, and I always see stuff circling around it. I don't know how to get in there, but that would be great.
So you set me up perfectly. So I was going to mention how you are a pilot professionally, and I didn't know if the origins of your flight. Were you a birder and that kind of got you interested in flying, or are you thinking about flying and got you into birds, or are they completely separate, or just have a fascination with flight?
They're totally unrelated. No offense, but everybody loves to try to make a connection. There just isn't one. I was going to be a wildlife biologist and not fly at all. And then a mentor, a professor, a herpetologist, actually convinced me to go ahead and go in the Navy and learn how to fly, just because it would give me a career and I could do this on the side. Yeah. And then I thought I was going to be on ships, and I ended up backing up into just accidentally almost being a pilot. So they're really totally unrelated. But flying as a pilot allows me the days off to try to get out and bird or whatever, now to take my sons out and bird. So unrelated, sorry.
No, it's good. So what is more amazing to you, that a half-ounce warbler can fly for days without stopping over the ocean, or that we can safely navigate planes full of people that weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds?
Oh, without question, it's the former. When I have a migration talk that I do, and my three big things, I'm like, if you don't remember anything else about this talk, remember this. Hummingbird that weighs 2 grams flies 650 miles across the Gulf of Mexico, unaided. That thought to early ornithologists was so preposterous, they just assumed they flew on the backs of ducks. There's not that many ducks that fly from the Yucatan, for starters, and they wouldn't allow a hummingbird on there anyway. So they do that by themselves. Second, blackpoll warblers leave the Maritimes and fly over 2,500 miles nonstop. Nonstop. Takes them like 85 hours. 85 hours. Nonstop. I mean, that bird's this big. Right. It's crazy. And then the last one is bar-tailed godwit, specifically E7, the one with the transmitter that was tagged and given a transmitter in New Zealand, flew to China for like 5 or 6 days, and then flew from China to Alaska for 7 days, stayed there. The transmitter kept working. Female, left Alaska, flew nonstop to New Zealand. Alaska to New Zealand. 7,000 miles. 7,000 miles. Crazy. So airplanes, that's physics and aerodynamics and thrust power to weight ratios and drag. But a little airplane, not only having the endurance, but being able to navigate using the setting sun, using the stars, using the magnetic field. Insane. I mean, I've been studying bird migration for decades, and it still blows me away. Nice. Kind of a long answer, sorry.
No, it's good.
You get there with me.
We got one more question from in the audience here. The question was more, well, the question was, do you think the number of birds of each species has declined? I think we know in general for many.
Yeah, without question. Without question.
But what if, I guess, describe maybe, I know you're not going to Kennesaw as much anymore, but maybe what did you see over the 20-some years that you were going to Kennesaw frequently?
Well, I mean, in the first 5 years, I mean, we just had ridiculous counts, like 33 cerulean warblers, like 30 hooded warblers, like, massive numbers of Cape Mays and black-throated greens and Blackburnians. And now we just don't. Now, part of that, I should say, in the mid to late 2000s, there was a really bad drought in Georgia for several years. And that cut back a lot of the moths and butterflies that live at Kennesaw. And as Pierre Howard once semi-famously said, that is the fuel of migration, the lepidopteran caterpillars and the other arthropods. And with that resulting loss of just overall moth abundance, we didn't get quite as many birds. And then, of course, the staggeringly negative numbers we get from ABC and from elsewhere about, I mean, cerulean warblers have been declining 3.4% per year for now almost 40 years. I'm not like a statistician, but that's really bad. Yeah. And you can tell it's exciting now to get like 1 or 2. And in spring, we had lots of days where we would have 18 or 20 or 22 ceruleans. And we don't get that anymore. Yeah. And it's a bummer. And I'm not that old. You talk to like Dennis Paulson, who was birding in Florida in the mid 60s. I didn't start till the mid 70s. He talks about fallouts that were just insane, and we just don't get them anymore. It's really sad. That doesn't mean we have to give up. I mean, there's a lot left to save, but.
Awesome. All right, Giff, well, thank you so much. We're going to switch to someone else, but if you can hang around, I'm sure there'll be, time permitting, more questions and stuff at the end.
I'm here. Thanks a lot, Adam. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to squeeze in another trivia question for you. I got one after each speaker, and then we're going to move to my buddy, Paul. If you've been paying attention to Giff, this question might be a lot easier right now. The females of what sought-after blue warbler, often found at Kennesaw during migration, drop from the side of the nest with wings tucked to their sides, only opening them once she is well below the nest. Some people call it the bungee jumping behavior. That's my trivia question. All right, next up, Paul Smith, joining us from way far south. Down in Encarnacion, Paraguay. How's it going, Paul?
Hello, everyone. Great. How's it going there?
Awesome. As good as expected, or as good as it can be. Well, first of all, what are you drinking? As you can tell, Paul and I are not only comrades about birds, but also our love of beer. So, yeah, what are you drinking down there, Paul?
Yeah, Giff went for the bird books as a backdrop. I've gone for the beer bottles as a backdrop. I'm drinking a beer from Encarnacion, which Adam, Quiagos Roy. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's getting better.
We had some early Quiagos, and it was rough. It was rough a couple of times. Yeah. So I guess one thing that might be interesting to people is kind of what is life like in Paraguay right now? And then from a bird perspective, what are you seeing around your house?
So far, the coronavirus hasn't really affected us. I mean, I think a lot of the issue in South America was people traveling from abroad and bringing it into the country. And because Paraguay is a country that not many people visit, we sort of got off quite lightly with that. So far, there's only really been about 100 and something cases, I think 150, 180 cases. So we're okay for now, but the borders are closed, and as a bird guide, it's not the greatest. But in terms of birds, there's still loads and loads around. I've got a bunch of banana quits that were nesting in the garden a few days ago. We've got a lot of citrus fruit coming out on the trees now, so we're full of tanagers. We've got sayaka tanagers and chestnut-backed tanagers, blue and yellow tanagers coming to feed off them. I had whistling heron and even an osprey fly over the house a couple of days ago. So bird-wise, the birds are benefiting from the fact that most people are not outside.
Cool. Another random thing I'll mention, that another way Paul and I keep in touch, is there's a beer app called Untapped. So if you're a bird life lister and you enjoy the beers, you can keep your life list of beers on that. It's a lot of fun until you do it too much, then you realize how much of a problem you might have. but it's pretty cool. So Paul, if I'm not mistaken, you moved permanently to Paraguay around 16 years ago, somewhere around there. And I bet most people on this call have no idea where Paraguay is on a map or much about it. So I wanted you to describe a little bit using maybe the ecosystems and the wildlife standpoint. What's special about Paraguay, and why should people know more about it? And it shouldn't be under the shadows of, you know, Argentina and Brazil and their larger neighbors.
Well, Paraguay is fantastic, and I think the fact that it is unknown is what makes it sort of exciting. So it's about the size, or twice the size of the UK. It's a relatively small country. I think that's about the size of California. Yeah. Maybe, yeah. Is that right? Yeah. So it's a small country, but it's got 5 overlapping ecosystems that all overlap here. And what that means is that you can get a really, really big list of birds in a very, very small amount of time, because the traveling time is actually quite small. So in terms of number of species, we've got about 725 species that occur in Paraguay. And in a 2 or 3 week trip, you can aim for 350, 400 species, which is pretty good. The main advantage compared to Brazil and Argentina, which have more species, is that you just don't travel anywhere near as much. You know, in a couple of hours travel, you're in a completely new habitat. And the 5 habitats that we have, 2 of those are amongst the most threatened in the world. So 2 of them are listed by Conservation International as 10 within the top 10 most threatened habitats in the world, which is the Atlantic forest, which is a sort of a humid rainforesty type of habitat, and the Cerrado, which is a South American savanna. So both of those are in the top 10 fastest disappearing habitats in the world. So as well as having 5 fascinating habitats, we've got 5 habitats that are extremely interesting for the birds that live there. Nice.
So I started off with the 2 authors, I guess, but Paul did co-author a regional field guide, there we go, to San Rafael, which is one of the, you know, top, if not the top hotspot birding locations in Paraguay. It's in that Atlantic rainforest, so it's a nice, you know, chunk of that forest. Great birding. But Paraguay as a whole lacks a country field guide. There is no Birds of Paraguay that you can go out and buy. And I know Paul's been working on this for quite a while, and it's starting to come together here. And I know you still have a lot of work to do, but I just was curious, what goes into writing a field guide to a country that doesn't have it? What little tidbits can you share with us?
A lot of field work, a lot of time spent out birding and discovering things. I mean, I've been here for 16 years now. I think I've seen something like 630, 640 of the 730 species. And a fairly significant number of those have been first country records. So one day that really sort of stands out is we went to the border close to Brazil and the Rio Apa. And in one morning, we found 3 species of birds that were new for Paraguay that hadn't been recorded before. So birding in Paraguay is a really exciting from that point of view. And almost every field trip, you've always got the blood pumping, thinking, you know, you've got a chance of finding something new.
So in a couple of years, or maybe sooner, when someone picks up the Birds of Paraguay and they're leafing through it, what are the birds that are really going to pop out? If you had to pick a couple jaw droppers that are from Paraguay, whether they're beautiful or they're cool looking or they're rare, what do you think are some of those birds, at least in your opinion?
I think the top sort of 3 or 4 birds, I mean, the number 1 bird that everybody wants to see is the white-winged nightjar, which is a bird that's endemic to the Cerrado, and there is one.
Look at that.
It's not showing it off. Its best feature is it has like completely white wings and completely white tail, so when it flies, it's like a flying goat. Right on cue there, Adam, nice job.
I know.
That species is down to about 1,000 left. So it's a critically endangered species, and it's actually relatively easy to see, and it's a real highlight of any trip because it lets you get very, very close. You can get to within a meter, as you probably were when you took that photo. Another really big bird, I think, is the helmeted woodpecker, which is sometimes called the South American ivory bill. And that was a bird that basically was discovered in the 1930s, 1940s and disappeared. No one knew what had happened to it until it was rediscovered in Paraguay. It's since been rediscovered in southern Brazil and northern Argentina as well, but it's a bird that sings at certain times of year, so it almost disappears as well, except for the breeding season when it can become quite easy to find. And I think maybe the 3rd bird I would pick is the saffron cowl blackbird, which looks a lot like a yellow-hooded blackbird that you have in the States. That's another bird that's fast disappearing. I think they're down to about 3,000 or 4,000 pairs left, and Paraguay is a sort of a stronghold for their populations.
So it's spring migration up here, and so we're having all these birds return up in North America, and we're very excited. Things are slowing down for you a little bit, but you also get those austral migrants, and I think many people aren't familiar because of maybe our North American bias. They don't know what an austral migrant is. So A, can you just give us a one-line definition of what an austral migrant is? And do you have any cool ones that you should mention that people can go look up when they're done with this?
Yeah, well, the fact that Paraguay is right in the middle of South America, it's in the heart of the continent, means we get two sets of migrations. And we actually have various different migrational patterns. We get the Nearctic migrants coming from the States, obviously. We get northern intertropical migrants, which come from northern South America and come down into Paraguay. And we also get austral migrants, which come from the south and spend the winter in Paraguay. But then there's also a bunch of weird, not very well understood migrational patterns, latitudinal migrants that sort of go east to west. We have altitudinal migrants that come down from the Andes to the lowlands. So it's a pretty interesting place from a migrational point of view.
Someone asked about the Golden Triangle down in Paraguay, and if you've ever run into any nefarious characters when you're out bird watching.
I don't know what the Golden Triangle is. What is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard of it either, but I think you might know. Maybe whoever asked that question can provide more details, Rick. But I guess the answer is no. I don't think you've run into too many troublemakers when you're out bird watching from my experience. So I joined Paul for summer research when I was in.
No,
oh, go ahead.
I couldn't hear what you were saying. They were all broken up, Adam. But no, I mean, Paraguay as a country is extremely safe. You know, it's a country that has always sort of had a bit of a reputation because of a dictatorship that lasted until 1989. But the other side of that coin of sort of social repression until 1989 is a society that's very low crime rates. You know, it's not like you hear in the cities of Mexico and stuff like that. You hear the crime is high. Paraguay, the crime is extremely low.
So that's more or less all I was getting at. That I've spent a couple months down there with you, and I've never, I've had great experiences and great times, and never anything that made me feel uncomfortable. So my last question I have for you, Paul, is a bit of an oddball. I'm going to put you on the spot. So you and I are both English Premier League fans, and we root for Everton specifically. So I got into Everton because of Paul. I liked English Premier League soccer back when I was in high school and college, when I played in high school. But back then, it was just the main teams. It was the Manchesters and Arsenal and Liverpool. And I hated being just a bandwagon fan who knew of the top 4 teams. And at that time, I met a guy who I liked who rooted for Everton, and they had a few Americans on their team. So they became my adopted team. And for the past 15 years, we've been struggling with that decision. But Everton is kind of always this mid-table, right in the middle. They spend a decent amount. They can never crack the top. What Paraguayan bird is the Everton of Paraguay?
That's an interesting question.
If it makes it easier,
I think maybe
Man City and what's the whatever else. So whatever the Aston Villa right now. So yeah, your table of.
I think I'm going to go for firewood gatherer, and the reason I'd say firewood gatherer is that it's a bird I despise. It looks a lot like a pipit. It's very, very brown, streaky, not very interesting. And it's quite difficult to find. It takes an awful lot of tramping through scrubby areas looking for them. So the reason I'm going for firewood gatherer is always a bird that everybody who comes to Paraguay always mentions and wants to see, because the name sounds like it's going to be really fantastic and it's going to be really great. And it takes a lot of effort to see it. And once you see it, people's reaction is always the same of, oh, is that a firewood gatherer? So I think that's a little bit like Everton in that it raises your expectations really high and then dashes them on the rocks afterwards.
Well, we were very lucky. When I was down there 3 years ago, they were just nesting on a power line at a gas station. So I guess I count myself fortunate because I didn't see that in my first trip. So awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much. And that's all I got for you for now. But again, there'll be stuff at the end. And yeah, enjoy your cerveza.
Okay, I will.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Cheers.
Paul Smith again from Fauna, Paraguay. He's, like I said, writing the Birds of Paraguay field guide and does great research down there. And if you're interested in birding down there with him or on a future, Audubon trip or something, we will keep you posted. It's a great place to go and bird. All right. I got another trivia question for you before we move on to Professor Jennie Carr. But very few songbirds travel from North America all the way to Paraguay. There are some shorebirds, but very few songbirds make it that far in the winter months. What member of the blackbird family is one of these species? Its Latin species name translates to rice eating, and the species has a robotic song that is reminiscent of R2-D2 from Star Wars. All right, and next we have my friend Jennie. Jennie, how's it going and what are you drinking?
I am drinking a Cuba Libre.
Nice.
Made with Flor de Caña Nicaraguan rum in spirit of the evening. So, and things are all right. I'm up here in exotic Maryland, hanging out just like everybody else in Georgia is, just living day by day.
Nice. And I'm on to beer number 2, nervous drinking as I talk. Lechuza. It's Corral there. It's from Dry County Brewing, which is up in the Marietta area. So again, another local-ish beer here in Georgia.
I appreciate your bird-themed brews.
Yeah.
And also your questions are really well thought out. So I'm wondering what's about to come my way.
Good. Yours were the only ones that I had to go back and read scientific papers.
Oh, sorry.
But no, hopefully that's good though. That's good.
Right.
So I can't remember too much from when we last saw each other, but obviously I know you study birds and you like birds.
Yeah.
How much of a bird watcher you are. So I just was curious what you've noticed at home lately. Have you seen some exciting birds, or maybe your cat out the window has some cool birds?
Yeah, unfortunately I live in town, so it hasn't been super exciting. But the other day when I was walking the dog, I did have an eagle chasing an osprey, which is always fun.
Nice.
To just kind of stop in the middle of the street and watch, see how it all ends. Usually the osprey always give up and eagle gets a free meal. So I do live on the eastern shore of Maryland, so it's pretty rural, pretty slow, lots of water. So osprey are like a dime a dozen, like they're just trash birds here, as some people say. But they're my favorite birds here. They're so fun to watch. So I think it's nice to have them all coming back. They're all nesting. So it's nice to have, that's my sign of spring here in Maryland. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so it was the American robins as being my harbinger of a spring, but now here it's the osprey, so it's nice to have them back.
Well, you beat me too. My next question was going to be, what's your favorite spring migrant? But I guess the osprey.
Osprey, you know, I'm sure you guys all hate this question too, but like, what is your favorite bird question? I hate that question. But yeah, that definitely, if I'm thinking about migratory birds in Maryland, I'd say osprey. Yeah, love to have them back.
So I think you hinted earlier, I mentioned you are a professor at Washington, Maryland. I know we've all read, and maybe some people in here have kids who are in college, but kind of what does the end of this semester look like for you? And
oh heavens, yeah. So yes, I'm tenured assistant professor in biology, and it was sort of strange because we went on spring break, and then during our spring break is when everything fell apart. And I was actually in Nicaragua for spring break, so I'm like periodically checking my email and like seeing a rapid crash from abroad. So now we're basically doing everything I use Zoom for all of my classes. I'm recording lectures and uploading them to YouTube. So I'm trying to keep some consistency, but it's totally different. But I think we're doing the best we can. I had one lab activity for my behavioral ecology class on predator mobbing. We were going to go out to our river and field campus and play screech owl calls in different habitats and collect data on who's coming in, intensity of mobbing behavior. Couldn't do it, so I had my students do it at home. And I think they may have had more fun doing that because they even said, they're like, I brought my mom and she thought it was the coolest thing ever. Like, so they brought their family and friends along and they had such a blast. So we're making lemonade out of lemons, I guess. That's what we're doing.
Very cool. Well, before I hit you with the hard-hitting bird questions, what's your cat's name?
My cat's name is Bagheera, after the Jungle Book, since he's all black. Yeah, he just turned 12.
Nice. Yeah, my cat is about the same. Yeah. 12 now, I'll be 13 later this year.
And for the record, I don't think he's ever felt the feel of grass under his feet. He's strictly indoors. No birds killed by my cat ever.
So you mentioned this a little bit when you're talking about the activities you have for your students, but to the best of my knowledge, a lot of your work is focused on trade-offs that birds to make and decision-making and balancing some of those things. I know you've done work with thermoregulation and birds keeping warm and balancing that versus being prey for a predator, and how they hold their posture during those times. I didn't know if you could kind of give us some of the, you know, the elevator pitch or some for the lake and some of the cool stuff that you've done and the theory behind it.
Yeah, so you did a good job of sort of boilerplating the past stuff, so that's good. I'm definitely, like, my motivating factor as a researcher is definitely behavior. Like I mentioned, I'm teaching behavioral ecology this semester. I am a behavioral ecologist. I like to think of myself as someone who uses birds to answer those questions. So anti-predator behavior in birds is really what gets me super jazzed. And yeah, I like to focus on the trade-offs. So how do other activities in life interfere with your ability to either look for a threat, respond to a threat, or do any other number of things? So in grad school, I focused a lot on wintering birds, mixed species flocks of sparrows and stuff like that. I've also studied hummingbirds and mourning doves and a bunch of different things to answer these questions. Right now, I'm working with folks at our bird banding station we've started this really long-term study on reproductive behavior of field sparrows, not necessarily because field sparrows, although they're really cool, are not like the most charismatic, like, gee whiz, a field sparrow sort of thing. But it's a well-characterized population. We know exactly how old our birds are. We know that this male, who's yellow-blue teal, is 8 years old, and his mate is yellow-orange, and she's 6, and their nest is here, and there are 3 chicks in it. Like, we know everything about our population. So we're asking a lot of questions related to age and sort of learning and how age influences reproductive success specifically. That's my biggest challenge, I think, as a researcher right now, is now that I'm in academia and a professor full-time, it's hard for me to do my winter work that I would like to do. I can't really do work in the academic year and balance that well. So it's down to summertime work. So I've kind of shifted more to breeding. Yeah.
How long has that field station or that field site been actively studied?
Woo. Well, the field sparrows themselves, this is going to be our 8th year. And, but the bird banding station out there has been banding birds for over 20 years.
Right.
So that's the Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory.
Nice. I just wanted to give that a shout out because those long data sets are so important, and sometimes they're difficult to keep going. So it's important.
It is. And this year we're sort of in a pickle, right? Because we usually have a field crew of about 5 of us, and about 3 of those are usually students. And with stay-at-home orders, like Maryland's not lifting ours anytime soon, I can't in good conscience ask my students who would be non-essential workers to be out and about. So it might just be me and the other field researcher just trying to tread water, banding birds. We'll see what happens.
So you mentioned kind of that again, trade-off and how prey or birds that could be prey might have to make those trade-offs. A lot of people right now are looking at their feeders, and they're looking at their birds, and they're looking at birds in their mowed grass. They have the robins out there, chipping sparrows, whatever. Is there anything that people tomorrow morning could go and look at those birds to pick up on a behavioral cue that maybe that is extra anxious, or there's a Cooper's hawk around, or I don't know, is there any way that you could take some of your science and they could apply it to their feeder watching?
Sure. That's a great question. Yeah, so that's super easy to do. One of the easiest metrics to look at for a bird, especially one that's feeding, is just their vigilance patterns. So birds are less vigilant when they're in a group because there's safety in numbers, there's collective detection of a threat. So if you are sitting and just casually watching your bird feeder, you'll probably see higher intensity feeding and more time with their head down if they're in a group versus if they're there alone. If they're there alone, they're probably picking up a seed and immediately lifting their head and sort of, shelling it or doing whatever they have to do mechanically. And then they'll put their head down fast and then right back up. So you'll see, even just sipping your morning coffee and watching your bird feeder, you'll see these sorts of things. And I've done research with hummingbirds on this, which is just about to be published, which is cool, looking at their vigilance behaviors when confronted with wasps. So if you have hummingbirds coming to your feeder and you have yellow jackets moving in, like they're using the exact same vigilance patterns as your bird feeders, your sparrows at your feeders do. So it's really seems to be pretty conserved amongst all birds, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned you work with mourning doves. So if I remember correctly, and from my perusing of your, during cold nights or, in a cold setting, they would drop their body temperature, right, to conserve energy, but then they would be less able to flush when a
Yes.
predator. I didn't know if this has been done, but it made me think, has there been any comparison done on roosting behavior and its correlation with temperature dropping across species? So like if birds roost in flocks versus individually, or if they tend to roost. My first field job, I was working with purple martins over in intercoastal. It wasn't cold then, but there was less predation there, they thought. Is there any, do you know of any sort of study looking at roosting behavior and how it affects the likelihood of them needing to lower their body temperature? That makes sense?
So the species of birds that do roost communally, I'm thinking especially like some of the titmice and things like that, or parrots and stuff during the winter months. They basically don't have to use those costly physiological behaviors because they stay a nice little warm sort of superorganism for the night. So they actively will smush their bodies closer together. And there was a cool paper, I'm blanking on the exact species that it was in my mind right now, but they use thermal imagery, which is something that I like to use when I study this kind of stuff, looking at birds that were given the opportunity to roost together at night versus kind of forced to have space in between them because of perch restrictions or barriers in a cage. And they lost fat overnight so fast if they couldn't roost together. So it has huge energy savings. So using hypothermia has energy savings too, but it has the cost of warming back up. Those birds were able to save their fat and not pay the cost of having to warm back up. So it was a win-win. Really good benefit of being in a group for sure.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to completely switch focus here. You mentioned when you were talking about your Cuban, you teach a field course out in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Was that in place when you started at Washington College, or is that something you set up?
That's something I set up. So I studied abroad as an undergrad. I studied for a semester in Ecuador, most of the time in the Galapagos, about 3 months in the Galapagos. And that experience changed my life. Like if I can literally point to that experience and say, I am the researcher, the person, the whatever, because of that 3 months on those islands. So I was super motivated to start one of these as a short-term faculty-led travel course. And I wanted to go back to the tropics because I love the jungle. My first time in the jungle, I was like, this is where like my heart sings, in the jungle. It's where I belong. So I visited this location in Nicaragua. It was wonderful. We took students down on 2 different trips. Unfortunately, the country fell apart. Then we moved it to Brazil. Now we might be going to Costa Rica. So unfortunately, it's sort of like bouncing, fortunately and unfortunately, I'll say. But yeah, so that was a course we did develop.
Well, I guess I was going to ask you Nicaragua specific, but I guess Brazil also. What are some of your favorite or most memorable birds that you've spotted?
Yeah, so some of the birds that I'll mention maybe aren't like the most gee whiz sorts of birds, but again, I'm motivated by behavior, which is really what gets me going, and sort of experiences around seeing those birds that made them special. So on our first trip to Nicaragua, there wasn't a Nicaragua bird guide at the time, so actually I have it next to me. We were using birds of Costa Rica, right?
Yeah.
And in the guide, we're close enough to the border, only about 7 miles away. It was pretty accurate, but it said that the macaws in our region were basically locally extirpated. So we didn't have high hopes. And there was a student on the trip who's a really super avid birder, and we were sitting next to a dock, and he put his binoculars up, and he's like, Dr. Carr, green macaws, and he starts running towards them with his binoculars up. He's on a dock.
Yeah.
On a dock. He gets about 6 inches away from the dock and does one of those like wobbly things at the end.
Yeah.
He was so excited, he was almost in tears. So some of the birds that I saw are like that, but I did see, I'm pretty sure it was a Tatter's tanager. I even pulled the page back. Natter's tanager in Brazil, which according to my guide is endemic with unknown sort of range.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of it. Otherwise, I would have been like, I didn't see that.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. But we are in the Atlantic forest when we go to Brazil, which is cool. Yeah.
Well, I'll get you out of here on this one. I heard, or you said you kind of had to maybe inherit the field sparrow, or maybe it just made the most sense for your questions.
Yeah.
But I think you did some sparrows, or also the birds you were observing in Indiana. I didn't know if you had a favorite sparrow or if there's one that you haven't seen that you would like to see.
I found working with out the bird banding station that whenever we catch our first junco of the year, I get really like disproportionately excited.
Yeah.
So I would say probably dark-eyed junco. I do miss the American tree sparrow though. We have them in Maryland, but they're rare.
Yeah.
In Indiana, where we did graduate work, it was like dime a dozen, the American tree sparrows everywhere. So I do miss them, but I'd say dark-eyed junco, favorite sparrow.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennie.
Thank you.
We'll have time at the end. But
Sure, great.
All right, thanks. All right, so Jennie, Dr. Carr did mention she works with field sparrows, which are Spizella, that's their genus.
Mm-hmm.
This is the next trivia question. So what Spizella sparrow, a close relative of the field sparrow, is found throughout Georgia year-round and was described by the naturalist Edward Forbush in 1929. I love this description. It's so flowery. We don't write like that anymore. As the little brown-capped pensioner of the dooryard and lawn that comes about farmhouse doors to glean crumbs shaken from the tablecloth by thrifty housewives. Well, that's in reference to a Spizella sparrow that you can find in Georgia.
I love this.
So it's one of my favorites. But, all right, so we're going to transition from Jennie. We're going back down south, and we're going to talk with Eric and Tony Martinez, my new friend from Oaxaca. Eric, how's it going, and what are you drinking?
Pretty good, Adam. I'm very glad to see you and see every one of you. I was drinking a margarita, but it's already gone.
I came prepared with my wife's lunchbox with an ice pack and multiple beers just in case, because I know how it
I
goes.
could be prepared too, but one is just enough.
I know. It's probably more than enough for me too. Cool. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
I'm going to start. If I'm not mistaken, you are from and still live in Teotihuacan de Valle. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's in southern Mexico in the state of Oaxaca.
Awesome. So my question is for people who don't know where that is and don't know the bird life there, what are your common yard birds? And have you seen anything special during the quarantine?
Yes, we've been basically looking at the garden and the windows for a month now. We've been playing this inside game amongst Mexican birders, and we are trying to get as many species as we can from our garden. So far, I've been putting 51 species for this month. Nice. Some of the common stuff that we get to see here are great kiskadis, social flycatchers, rufous-backed thrushes, plain-capped star-throats, gray-breasted woodpeckers, dusky hummingbirds, Buchar's wren, at the garden. So it's not too bad. I don't have a feeder. Everything is basically from the flowers and trees and bushes that are outside. Been thinking about setting up a feeder, but so far I haven't been doing it. I think I want birds to get used to the flowers and the seasons rather than to me.
That's great. And that's something we have a lot of programming and work around planting native plants. It's in our climate here in the Southeast U.S., we have a lot of exotic Asian species that are kind of taking over our forests. So it's great that you have, the plants that are supposed to be there, providing for the birds that are there. And like Giff mentioned earlier, all the lepidopteran, all the caterpillars, the birds really rely on that. So that's good that you can do it without the feeder. That's great. So you mentioned that you're from Oaxaca. You talked about the birds there. It's a place that I've always dreamt of and thought of as such a special place. But the tough question for you, Eric, is what makes Oaxaca most special? The birds, the food, the mezcal, or the rich culture and history?
I would go with the birds. I don't care about the other stuff.
I thought that might be your answer, but yeah, it's got so much going on down there. It's kind of like this, in my eyes, idyllic, Mexican town. It has it all. It has unique birds. It has such history, food, all of it. So it's great.
Yes, like some of the people are mentioning, the moles aren't bad either. We have 7 different moles. The black one is the most common.
Nice.
The culture is also pretty cool, pretty nice. The history and the whole background is also fantastic. So combine all of that with the bird, it's just phenomenal. Yeah. The state has 700 species of birds. So when you combine birds and all the other cultural stuff and food, I think you get a fair a fair amount of interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So this time of year down there, you're probably, some winter birds are probably leaving or have left, and you probably maybe have some transients coming through. I've kind of been asking everyone this, but is there a bird that is transient or migrate this time of year that's your favorite, or is there a departing winter bird that you'll miss?
Well, some of the birds are actually going through with all the checklists that we've been putting together with all the Mexican birders. We've been noticing a lot of migration still going on. Just 2 days ago, somebody had a cerulean warbler on their yard. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. They've been mentioning a lot of Cape May warblers too. I've been having yellow warblers going through my garden, even though are not so common here. All the yellow rums are gone. All the western species of warblers are gone. Basically, the ones that are moving through right now are eastern species. Today, the folks at Veracruz are having a huge amount of Mississippi kites going through as well.
Nice.
Several hundreds already, just from one yard. It's incredible what they're seeing. The area where I am located, it's sort of like isolated or covered in these 10,000 feet mountains. So some of the migratory species that we get are very in small numbers, I'd say. So we get very few of them. All of them are going through the flatlands along the northern part of the state towards Veracruz and the Pacific, the Atlantic coast of Mexico along the Gulf of Mexico. So we're seeing a lot of stuff, definitely, but the big numbers are already in the Atlantic slope. I've been hearing a lot of thrushes at night and warblers as well too. So I think things are going through.
Well, I have to do a plug here. So Eric and I are co-leading a trip next March for Atlanta Audubon. We have one spot left, and I know it's hard to think about traveling right now, but hopefully by then we'll be in a better place and we'll be itching to get out and experience new places and new birds. And you've already done such a great job. My question was just going to be, why should people join us and why is Oaxaca so special? You've kind of hit on a lot of that, but is there anything else that you haven't mentioned about the bird life or just the place in general that you can mention to get that last person to come with us?
Well, I'd say that there's a lot of cool birds that they need to see. I mean, I'm sure that anybody would like to see dwarf jays and red warblers and bumblebee hummingbirds and red-breasted chats and lesser ground cuckoos. But along with that, if you can combine some really good meals, I think that would be fair. Besides, not everybody would have the pleasure to travel with Adam
Course.
on a Oaxaca trip.
So maybe you just answered this question when you mentioned the mountains nearby, but Oaxaca, your region of Mexico in particular, is known for its endemicism. There are lots of birds that are native only to your state or that part of Mexico. Why is that? Is it because of the mountains and the valley there, or why is Oaxaca have that type of endemic species?
Yes, it's a good question. Great question, by the way. So we have about 65, 70 endemics, depending on which taxonomy you follow, that are endemic to Mexico. Specifically to the state, there is one or two, again, depending on what kind of taxonomy you follow. If you do AOS, there's only one species that is endemic to the state of Oaxaca. If you do IOC, there are 2 species of birds that are endemic to the state of Oaxaca. But the state has the biggest diversity in ecosystems in Mexico. So it goes from sea level up to 10,000 feet. And depending on which side of the state you are, you can have a slope that is rather dry facing the Pacific, a plateau that is isolated in Oaxaca City, near Oaxaca City, or the tropical rainforests and cloud forests that are on the Atlantic slope. And they all have very different types of birds. And that combines a lot of these endemics that are shared with other states. So if we want to talk about endemic to the state, there's only like 1 or 2, depending again on the taxonomy. But in terms of endemic to Mexico, we have about 65, 70 species that are endemic to Mexico and relatively easy to travel to see them because the distance that you have to cover is relatively small. Sometimes what makes it difficult is the terrain. Being so mountainous makes a drive rather long because you have to go through a lot of winding roads. But that is also very good because it creates a lot of micro habitats, and you can find in one spot bumblebee hummingbirds, and by the time you drop a couple hundred meters, you find amethyst-throated hummingbirds, and then you go a little lower down and you start to see magpie jays, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It is that diverse that, for example, the continental shelf is about 7 miles from the shore. So when we are doing the pelagic, we don't need to go for hours out. We just basically need to reach 8 miles out, and we'll be already in very good waters for pelagics.
What are the 1 or 2 species endemic to the state, depending on your taxonomy?
That would be blue-capped hummingbird that is endemic to Oaxaca with AOS, and if you do IOC, blue-capped hummingbird, which is called by IOC azure-capped hummingbird, and then cinnamon-sided hummingbird, which according to AOS is a subspecies of green-fronted, but the range is isolated in the mountains of the southern Sierra of Oaxaca, and it's very similar to the green-fronted, but it has the cinnamon on the sides of the chest. So that would be the other species that it's endemic to the state if you go with IOC. Oaxaca sparrow, Rosita's bunting, cinnamon-tailed sparrow are species that are mostly located in Oaxaca, but the range goes slightly into the adjacent state. So Rositas and cinnamon-tailed sparrow go a little bit into Chiapas. Oaxaca goes just slightly into Puebla. So the fact that it's already found in other places already breaks down the whole idea of being endemic.
Right. So you are a guide and owner of Mexico Birding. How long have you been guiding? And I was actually referred to from Noah Stryker, who many people know, who did the Global Big Year a couple years ago.
That's right.
If you have any single stories or famous clientele, any noteworthy experiences you'd like to recount with us.
Well, I've been birding basically for slightly over 25 years. I started when I was 8 years old. But I started bird guiding as a profession in the last 9 years. I'm a biologist, but I couldn't do much of a job and living in Mexico as a biologist. So I just got into taking groups out for birds and birding, and it's been great. It's been fantastic. With Noah, it was quite fun because, as you know, he was doing the World Big Year. So he was coming from the south, and we had the plan of doing 10 days of non-stop intensive birding throughout Oaxaca. And we did pretty good, I think. We got almost 370 something species of birds in 10 days.
Very cool. Do you have a nemesis bird for either Oaxaca or Mexico as a whole? So what's
Yes.
your most wanted, or the one that's got, you've dipped on the most?
That would be Hudsonian godwit.
Ah, nice. Huh.
So Hudsonian godwit comes through Oaxaca near the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Once every year, usually around May, he stops to feed, and it only does it for a couple of hours. So from the city of Oaxaca, where I live, near where I live, to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is a 6.5-hour drive nonstop. So those days that I've been told that there's a Hudsonian godwit there, I get into the car and I drive there. And by the time I get there, it's gone. So I did that 4 times, and so I stopped. I'm not chasing that bird anymore. I'm just waiting for it to show up. I'm not gonna.
All right, I'm gonna get you out of here with this last quick, easy question. Take your pick: red warbler, orange-breasted bunting, slaty vireo, or bridled sparrow. What's your favorite?
Slaty vireo.
Those are 4 birds I'm very excited to hopefully get in March. So awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much. Again, Eric is a bird guide and company owner down there with Mexico Birding, and he and I are fingers crossed. Things will be closer to normal and we'll be at a healthier spot next March. So thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Adam. Thank you.
All right. Another question here for trivia before we head over to Bryan. Lenz, what striking bird that may visit your feeder if you put out oranges or grape jelly overwinters throughout the state of Oaxaca? So what bird overwinters in Oaxaca and is known to take down some oranges or some grape jelly? All right, Bryan, how's it going? What are you drinking?
I am doing well, thank you. And I'm in Milwaukee, so I'm drinking a Miller High Life.
I was trying really hard to come up with some Milwaukee beer questions, since that's kind of like the spot,
I imagine you real beer connoisseurs are probably rolling your eyes at this at the moment, but it's okay.
It's local. It's local. You know, you can claim that at least. You know. So my other questions for you. One is, what is going on with bird life in Milwaukee? Are you noticing anything around your yard? And also, what do you think about Jordan Love?
Jenny's gonna. I don't know how you're gonna feel about this, but the Juncos are finally leaving.
Yeah.
For me, the Junco means, oh crap, winter's here. And so I like the birds, but I also like it when they leave. And as far as the Packers draft pick, I was surprised.
Me too. Yeah.
And I'm not looking forward to the next 5 months of people talking about it constantly on the radio and trying to make controversy.
Yeah, it was definitely a surprise for those of you who watched the NFL draft last night and are kind enough to be watching us instead of night 2 of the draft. So we'll see what those are. Before we get into your current position, you know, you and I met last summer, and I know a little bit about your background, but it seems pretty cool, pretty interesting. You spent time at Oxford, you did primate research, you taught anthropology. I didn't know if you could kind of give us a synopsis of kind of what you did and how you got to the American Bird Conservancy and maybe your time in the tropics.
Sure.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It appears to be a cool route to me. So I'm
trying to figure out how long I want to make my answer. As an undergrad, I was going to do environmental law, and so took conservation biology and had an up-close experience with the primate on campus, and took the monkey class and wrote a paper on one of the professor's focal species and just gave it to him and said, I want to go with you. And he said, all right, come on. And I hated the first week of it. Used a can of bug spray every day, I think. But then I adjusted and I said, all right, I'm doing this. No more law school. So then I got the master's degree in the UK, a second master's and a PhD at Tulane, where I moved 1 year before Katrina to New Orleans, which was incredible timing. Did primate fieldwork in Belize, Peru, Costa Rica, and my main dissertation fieldwork in Brazil, where I looked at the impacts of habitat fragmentation on the community of primates. So I kind of just walked around and counted stuff. And my advisor one time said, as I was coming back and talking to the ornithologist, he said, you should be studying birds. And I said, I know, leave me alone. So when I finished school, the primate jobs were going to have me gone a ton. And so I switched to birds and started as the director of Bird City, Wisconsin, which is a community conservation program. And that led me to ABC.
That's perfect, because my next question was about your time at Bird City, Wisconsin. What interested you about that position and that organization?
Now, this is why the tropical fieldwork was not so great of an idea.
And
all right.
So yeah, what attracted you to Bird City, Wisconsin, and then kind of more broadly birds in the urban environment? Why does that interest you?
Well, just to be honest, part of the appeal of Bird City, Wisconsin was that my wife and I are both from Wisconsin, so we were able to go home. Yeah. But I think, you know, biologists and professional conservationists do a ton of really good work in the field. But if we want the general public to support the work in the field and believe that it's important and vote for people who think it's important, they have to have some intimate experiences, and most of those happen in urban areas.
Very cool. Yeah, it's great. Again, referencing when we met last summer, you know, I do my little role down here at Atlanta Audubon with birds and buildings, and that's obviously become your main thing with ABC. And I was so excited to see the Milwaukee Bucks arena, the NBA team, because it was the first bird-friendly arena, and you had a role in that happening. And I didn't know if you could talk about, A, what makes it bird-friendly for those who don't know, and what were some of the biggest hurdles that you had to get through to make sure that they were thinking about birds during the planning and construction.
Sure. I describe that process as 3 years of me being a likable pain in the ass. So to kind of make the first approach takes a lot, but then, you know, you get a meeting and it goes well, but it's always on you to follow up. But if you do it too often or too soon, they don't want to talk to you anymore. So I had to make sure everybody was always happy and wanted to talk to me. But then, you know, I would say, all right, well, I want to call them next week. So it's got to be 4 weeks that I wait. And so it was a lot of kind of walking them through what makes a bird-friendly building and telling them that they could do it. So, you know, basically it's lighting, the glass, and monitoring. And, you know, at the beginning it was, we can do one part, but not the other part. And then it switched, and we can do the part we said we couldn't do, but we're not going to do the part we said we could do before. And then it was, well, you can do this part and only half of the other one. And then finally got them to do all of it. And then they said, but we're not going to put it on our application. So it was really a great process, though. And it ended up being bird friendly. You know, one of the rules that often gets lost when people talk about bird friendly buildings is just reducing the amount of glass, period. Yeah. So if you look at the arena itself, you know, 4 sides, most of the glass is on one side. So you can walk most of the way around the building and there aren't windows on 75% of it. I mean, they're there, but they're not massive. And then on the side where there are windows, they put frit on the fly-through parts and on the lower parts of it. It's not totally fritted because the way the calculation works, it's the score for the whole building. So then we're monitoring it right now to see how it's going.
Cool. And the frit that Bryan's referencing, if you don't know, it's kind of a pattern within the glass to alert the birds, kind of break up their reflection and make them pause before they mistake a reflection of a tree or something else as a clear flyway, and hopefully will reduce the number of birds that are running into the building. A bit more lighthearted, hopefully there are a few NBA teams or NBA fans, but you guys are lucky enough to have Giannis Antetokounmpo up in Milwaukee. In your opinion, what is the Giannis of the bird world? What species is the Greek freak?
Oh, man. Well, I guess I'll go with some of my previous experience too, and we'll just go for dominance, and I'll say a harpy eagle.
Nice. Nice. It's a good choice, for sure.
I was lucky that one of the things that tiptoeing around the jungle for months on end and being silent and counting stuff got me was witnessing a harpy eagle kill a monkey.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
The dream bird for anyone.
That's kind of what Giannis does to the hawks.
Right. They're pretty rough right now. They're pretty rough down here. Well, kind of, you know, I've asked everyone kind of like what they're seeing nearby and birding at home. With people spending more time at home, they're enjoying their feeder birds. Here in Georgia and further north, the migrants are showing up. What can we do, or what can a person at home right now do to their windows or to their lighting to make it safer, either temporarily or hopefully on a more permanent basis?
Well, I can tell you we are hard at work redoing the ABC Collisions website, which will hopefully in the next month or 2 go live. And it will have a really clear answer to that walks you through how to do it yourself. So I would invite everybody here to check back in on that. Pretty much for a home window, the thing we talk about is start with any window where you've heard a collision and put what we call a retrofit on it. So you can do all kinds of different things. You can put, there's a feather-friendly dot pattern that puts little tiny white dots. I have that on my window. There's an Acopian bird saver, which is just like a hanging rope that goes outside on the front of your window. ABC has bird tape. If you've got screens on your house, the screens will make your windows bird friendly. A lot of the screens are now like in the middle of a window instead of on the outside. So you can usually take down those storm windows and move the screen to be at the outside layer. So that's an easy one. You know, even if it's half your window, it's still 50%.
Yeah. One thing I think I did a bad job when I invited Bryan in here, I did not reiterate that he is the bird collisions campaign manager for the American Bird Conservancy. So he and his colleagues there are doing just tons of great work. The website's already very informative, but I'm really excited for all the updates. So definitely check that out. And you can visit our webpage as well at Atlanta Audubon. And I'm here, so I'm happy to help you, you know, kick around some ideas, some things you and your kids or grandkids can do to at least make your window safe for the rest of migration here in Georgia.
So yeah, Adam's asking me collisions questions, but he knows what he's talking about.
I figured it would come better from you. I knew the answers, but you're the star here. So I guess the last question I was going to get you out of here on was just what interests you or what drives you to address the issue of bird building collisions. I mean, you kind of hinted on the education and the intimacy of getting people in urban environments out there. So I assume it's rooted in that. But is there something specific about this issue, this particular cause of bird loss that drives you to work forward in making cities safer?
Yeah, I think I probably have 3 answers to that. We'll see if I can remember the third one by the time I get to it. The first is that it's the only intimate experience with wildlife that everybody has had. Everybody has heard a bird hit a window or seen a dead bird on the ground next to a window. And that's really the only thing you can say where everybody has been moved by something. Whether they do something about it or not is another question, but it's an intimate experience with wildlife. The second kind of motivating factor is, research shows that window collisions in the United States kill up to 1 billion birds every year. And that takes a massive toll. Cats, if you have a cat, keep your cat inside. Those are the champion at 2.4 billion birds a year. Habitat loss, depending on where you were, pick your time 0 to start, that would probably be number 1. But collisions in cats, we know what to do. Which kind of goes to the third reason, is that this is one we can solve. Everybody out here has windows that they own and are in control of. Home windows are 43.6%, I think, of the total collisions. So your windows make a difference too. It's nice to have something where, it's a huge challenge. It will make a huge difference. It impacts people on, multiple levels, and we know what to do. And it's just a matter of, doing enough advocacy to get people to do it.
Yeah. I think one thing that really interested me when I started said, hey, we should look into this issue is, like you said, I'd seen some birds that obviously hit windows, but I just had no idea the scale. I hadn't really thought about how it's, like you said, it's something that we can fix with just, convincing people to, think about their preferences, and it's doable.
And New York City just passed a law. There are a number of places that have passed bird-friendly building legislation, but New York City just kicked all their butts because New York City's new legislation requires that every single new building or any building that has a retrofit or renovation that changes the glass has 90% of all the glass used in the building in the first 75 feet has to be bird-friendly. So if you build a new house, the house counts. If you build a 100-story building, that's in there too. And one of the things that's going to happen in New York as they crank down on CO2 emissions is a lot of those come from buildings, and a lot of them come from old buildings with leaky windows. So the fact that renovations are included is big, because usually it's just new construction. And it's really hard. It's $1 billion a year right now. So if we fix every new building going forward and don't touch anything that exists, we just hit pause on that. Right. Until we've replaced every building. So kudos to New York.
Cool. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us and for sticking around for an hour and chatted. I really appreciate it. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, man. It was great. It was a privilege. My last trivia question I have for everyone is, this species, which is the state bird of Wisconsin, where Bryan is from, has the Latin species name of migratorius. While this bird does migrate, its reputation as a harbinger of spring may be a bit misleading. So we only got like 10 minutes. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. Feel free to throw them in the chat box as we wait for those to roll in. I do have a couple preloaded questions for you guys. First of all, most of us up here, to the best of my knowledge, have young-ish children. And so I was just curious, are they showing an interest in birds or wildlife? And how are you handling that? My daughter is only 2, and Jennie and I were chatting the other day about the Cornell live cams that I've had on my TV with the Panama cam showing crimson-back tanagers and cool stuff to get me excited while working home. My daughter really likes it, but I don't want to be too overbearing with my obsession of birds. I didn't know if any of you with kids had any thoughts, or those with older kids, any tips?
I have a thought.
Yeah.
So I talk like you when I have twin boys who are now 7, And I talked to a lot of parents of nature loving kids when they were born to say, how do I try to encourage them? And they all said, don't push them. They will see you going out birding, or in my case, bugging, or both. And I don't push them. I say, if you want to go, let's go. Or when we go on hikes, I say, oh, hey, let's take a look at this log over here, or let's take a look at this puddle and see if we can find anything in it, or what's that I hear? Of course, it doesn't always work. Like the other day when I turned in that tape of a cerulean warbler singing, in the background, you can clearly hear my son Wyatt going, Dad, hurry up. So it doesn't always work, but I don't ever push them, and they have become more interested just because I don't push them, and they know I'm going to do it anyway, and they want to go.
Right.
So that's my best advice.
Nice.
Michelle? Jenny?
Anyone else?
No kids here, just pets.
I've got 2 kids. One is very, very small. He's only 3, and he's absolutely fascinated by animals. I mean, from being able to walk, he was sort of crouching down to look at insects and flies and things like that. So I think there's a genetic element to it, oddly enough. I think that some people are just born loving it, and others don't. My older son, he really likes the catching of frogs and stuff like that, but he's not really that interested in looking at it once he's caught. It's more the sport of doing it. So I mean, the little one, before he could talk, was literally studying anything that moved.
I have another question here, which I totally stole from Facebook right before I got on here, but I thought it was a great question. What species of bird do you want to see the most that you've already seen? So not a new life bird. What's a bird that you've already seen at least once, or maybe you've seen it a million times? Maybe you're just really excited to see that cerulean warbler gift. But what bird that you've already seen do you really want to see again? Maybe.
Arrow-headed warbler in Jamaica.
What was that? Say that again.
Arrow-headed warbler in Jamaica.
Nice.
White-collared mannequin for me.
I think I would pick a selva cacique, which is an endemic that was in southeastern Peru and described in the 60s when someone shot one, and then not seen again until like 1999, and I saw it in 2001. But I saw it for like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
I knew what it sounded like. We turned around, we all looked, they landed in a tree and immediately took off. And so I'd like to get a better look.
I'm going to say Hudsonian godwit because they're hard to see here as well.
Yeah, for me it's Hudsonian godwit too.
I'll say I should have come prepared with an answer, but spot-winged falconet comes to mind, Paul. I got pretty good looks, but I was 14 years ago, and I would love to see that one again. I will go ahead and knock through the trivia answers real quick, just in case we're running out of time. So let's see if I can go back. The first question, which talked about the color of the wing pits, that was rose-breasted grosbeak. So males have that pinky red, females are yellowish. The bluish warbler, of course, was cerulean. The blackbird that goes down to Paraguay that eats rice, bobolink. The spazella, that is the pensioner who loves to eat crumbs, is the chip sparrow. The bird that overwinters in Oaxaca that likes jelly and oranges is the Baltimore oriole. And then the state bird of Wisconsin is the robin.
A bunch of people got them right, including, I should say, Atlanta Audubon's Michelle Hamner was like always near the beginning.
There we go. I guess one last quick question. I am on to my third beer, and I'm so proud of myself that I even have the right coordinated glassware. This is from 3 Taverns here in Decatur. My 3 Tavern.
Nice.
It's a hazy New England IPA, so it's pretty tasty. This is kind of a generic bird question, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyways. Do you have a spark bird? Is there a bird that kind of got you interested in birds, whether as a profession or as a hobby? I can start. Mine's red-winged blackbird. It's not the sexiest of choices. I knew robins and cardinals just growing up, but I took an ornithology class when I was 16 through Ohio State. And I remember waiting outside as my mom was filling out my registration, and I saw a male red-winged blackbird. I said, "Oh, what is that? I've never noticed anything." Really thought about what a new bird was, and that was my spark bird. So if anyone else can chime in, that'd be great.
Eastern towhee for me, believe it or not. I went on my first bird walk and I could hear, you know, drink your tea, and I had no idea what it was, and neither did anybody else on this little walk. So I just kind of wandered off in the forest and finally saw it. Of course, I identified it as a painted redstart. I was 11, so
Yeah, okay.
eventually after a couple of days, I was like, no, can't really, got to be something else. But that was cool.
I think
Mine was a
Go ahead, Paul.
No, you go first, Jenny. You go first.
Okay. I was going to say mine's probably even less exciting. I think it's probably the mourning dove. I grew up in the woods, and, you know, when you're a real little kid, everybody thinks they're an owl, like
Yeah.
calling in the middle of the day constantly. And when I found out it was a dove, it kind of floored me. So that got me interested in birds from the start, from a little tyke.
So mine was a cage bird, believe it or not, and because my next door neighbor used to keep zebra finches, and one year there was a baby born that had no wings and no legs, and he was going to kill it, and that was the bird that set me off. So I insisted on him giving it to me and looking after it, and I was only about 4 or 5 at the time, I think, and that was the one that really got me interested in birds.
Good for you, Paul.
That's great.
For me, it was the black vented oriole. That was my spark bird.
I don't have a single bird, but it was when I was probably about 11, and my neighbor was in his front yard staring up at the trees. And I walked over and said, "What the heck are you doing?" And he handed me his binoculars, and the stuff he was looking at was enough. And it was not too long before he was taking me on birding trips.
That's awesome.
One thing kind of interesting, combining Paul and Bryan here, we actually had a volunteer find a zebra finch that had ran into a window in downtown Atlanta. So a pet bird or a research bird somehow got out and ran into the Atlanta Financial Center right over 400 in Buckhead. So one of the more interesting window collision victims. But I'm conscious of everyone's time. Hopefully this has been a lot of fun. It's 8:30, so we can get out of here. Again, thank you to all of my guests. Go read Jennie's scientific papers and go get books. And you know, I'm sure, Giff, you have some new ones for dragonflies and damselflies. Am I correct in that? Or maybe, I'm not sure how new they are, but.
Well, the dragonfly, damselfly book, second edition came out in 2012. I have, believe it or not, a tiger beetle book in press. It'll be out in about a year, Tiger Beetles of the Southeast. And now I'm working on Jumping Spiders of the Southeast book.
Nice. Yeah, we've lost Giff a little bit. He's gone over to the bug side.
But I bird every time I'm looking for bugs by ear, at least.
Yeah. And Eric and I, again, March, if there's one of you who's itching to travel once things get back, hopefully, to our new normal.
Oh, man, I totally want to go, but I can't.
Yeah.
I want red warbler.
There we go. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Yeah, the bunting, too. And then, yeah, I'm sure, you know, in the not too distant future, Paul and I will be hitting the roads again, looking for Chaco endemics and Atlantic forest birds and that nightjar. So if you want to come get a photo with me that looks something like this one that I got on the last Atlantic trip to Paraguay, took some work, but we got it. And then, as Bryan mentioned, ABC is doing a great new overhaul of their website. So check it out and think about how you can make your windows safer, and then just the 7 basic steps that they've highlighted with some of their partners on how to help birds at home, from drinking shade-grown coffee to keeping your cat inside, you know, planting native plants, being a community scientist. There's all sorts of stuff out there. So awesome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
I really appreciate
Thank you.
the help from all you guys and girls.
All right.